A lot of us here are old enough to remember the Los Angeles race riots back in 1992, and perhaps even the name Rodney King. Does that ring a bell? Rodney King was a black man who was beaten by a bunch of white police during those difficult days. It was caught on film, which today, with everybody carrying a phone, is pretty common, but back then it was virtually unique. And as a result, 4 white policemen were charged with assault and acquitted. Then there was a civil trial, since not everybody, at least from the national scene, was content with that. And 2 officers were found guilty, while 2 others were acquitted. At one point, as this dragged on through courts and reporters and TV reports and so on and so forth, Rodney King famously made an extemporaneous little speech. It's only 5 or 6 sentences long. I found it without any problem on Wikipedia. Type in his name and it pops up. But the speech isn't remembered for 5 or 6 little sentences. It's remembered for one rhetorical question. Can't we all just get along? That's what we all want, right? Can't we just get along? Our religions certainly teach us that we should, but everybody in the Middle East seems to hate everybody else in the Middle East. And our president here in America stereotypes Muslim immigrants as terrorists and Hispanic immigrants and refugees as rapists and murderers. Fort Worth has the dubious distinction of having recently joined the group of cities in which white police officers have shot innocent black victims. As a Jew in Fort Worth, a medium-sized city in the middle of the country, I used to think it was perfectly safe to go to the synagogue, with nothing to worry about. But that was before Pittsburgh. And then the suburbs of Los Angeles. You begin to wonder. Every time you turn on the news, it seems obvious that national and religious and racial groups are leading to mistrust, at least, and too often hate. Our American founding documents and professed ideals say all the right things. We are all created equal, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. What's our problem? Well, perhaps we can understand it better if we bring a bit of the light of modern scholarship to bear on who we are. So this should be familiar territory to just about everyone here too. A baby is born. Parents, other relatives on both sides, close friends, everybody is thrilled. And thanks to hormones released in the mother's brain in the birth process, the mother immediately wants to hold and cuddle that new child. She will nurse and change this little person, rock her, comfort her, laugh with her, respond to the baby's endless needs and whims. If the father is present, he will almost certainly develop the same sort of bonds. Family and friends too, all of us, even total strangers, will find this little creature adorable. So little, so cute. This is hardwired behavior in our brains, the result of genetics and hormones. It's not universal in nature. We see it in some of our pets or in birds outside the window, the bedroom or wherever, sitting on eggs for a long time, even in this kind of weather, right? And then when the hatchlings are there, bringing food to them. But insects lay their eggs and disappear. Guppies and various other animals seem to lack any parental behavior and may enjoy newborns for breakfast if they're available. So our human reaction to parenthood is not inevitable. It is the result of millions of years of evolution. At the end of World War II in England, there was some interesting research. Babies were dying in orphanages, more orphans than usual because of the war, obviously. And they were being fed, and they were getting proper medical care. But like half of them in these orphanages were dying. What was the problem? They finally figured out they weren't being held, they weren't being touched, they weren't being related to as human beings naturally need to do. That too is hardwired our social nature. This is a beautiful thing. We need physical and psychological relationship with special others throughout our life cycle, not just infants. We're not born hostile, but loving and needing love. Ironically, though, this appears also to be the root of various problems which can be dealt with but not eliminated, it seems to me. In a crowd of little ones, we have a preschool at Bethel. I recently saw a little toddler as there was a crowd of, mothers and fathers picking up after school their, pint-sized offspring. One grabbed his mother's hand and said, with a bit of an edge in his voice, "My mommy." Like, leave her alone. This one's mine. We each learn various survival mechanisms as well as being born with some. Ideally, we'll learn that mother and then later father too can be trusted not only to take care of us, but to have our well-being in mind in unfamiliar or otherwise seemingly threatening situations. Then we find that siblings generally will look out for us and other family members, and as we get some more experience, we find out about neighbors and teachers. Again, we're social creatures who live in community, and we come to trust and feel some sense of obligation in return to first family members and then other groups, larger and larger concentric circles of people around us. Wonderful, right? Yet the flip side of all of this trusting is that it may be scary to go outside those familiar circles. It's part of growing up that we have to do that. Still, let me suggest, seeing our world in us-them terms comes naturally from just the way we're wired and the way we live. The problem, then, is that we quickly learn to trust familiar people and mistrust others. Don't go with strangers, we all tell or told our children, and we better tell them that. And whom do we meet first so that they're not so strange? Well, by and large, we meet those with whom we have things in common. Family, of course, but then neighbors and community members. And this is a pretty stratified economically and segregated racially and sometimes religiously society that we live in, and most others are to some extent or to a great extent as well. Early on, we will find ourselves more comfortable with people who are familiar, who are like us. And like us isn't a bad thing per se. We need a sense of belonging and of comfort. That's part of what brings us to gatherings like this on a Sunday morning or a Friday night in my case. But each us implies a them, the ones with whom we are not so comfortable and who might even want to harm us. In schools and later in neighborhoods and cities, we will form cliques and affinity groups of every variety. Even if we rarely feel mistreated by others, and certainly if we do feel that way, consciously or unconsciously, the roots of racism and sexism and classism and chauvinism and so on are born into us from our earliest experiences. In addition, returning to the hardwired, we are naturally selfish. We want our food first. We want the best toy, which with the little ones is often just the one that somebody else picked up first, but I want that one. As we grow a little older, we'll want the most desirable boyfriend or girlfriend. We can learn when to share, learn when competition is just part of the game and when it's rather selfish and irresponsible. Even then, we're going to have more loyalty to these close-in concentric circles, and still some, but less as we go further and further out. And our brains, the anthropologists tell us, have evolved for us to live in small groups. We can only know well, really follow the life of about 150 people. Right? We can, be familiar with much bigger groups, but to really have a deep relation, a relatively small number. Still, we're also hardwired for compassion, for feeling other people's pain. When one baby in a hospital newborn nursery starts to cry, what happens? The whole room is suddenly screaming. Newborns can't have learned that. It's hardwired. They just do it instinctively. We adults feel bad for people and even for animals when we see them being mistreated or suffering pain. Emotional contagion, this is all called, and it works on the positive as well as the negative side. Situation comedies in TV used to program in a laugh track, because when other people are laughing, you're much more likely to join in. So we're not purely selfish and self-concerned. We are hardwired for positive things as well. In some, the other side of group bonding, which is a good thing, can be mistrust and condescension and even hatred, which are obviously bad things. We need to consciously socialize ourselves and our children to be more open to those who are different, which isn't a synonym for inferior. Yes, we're initially most comfortable with people like us. In time, however, we can certainly learn to be much more open and indeed find differences fascinating. Our culture understandably puts emphasis on things like school spirit. Sounds good, right? Black pride or other sorts of ethnic solidarity. Patriotism, our nation, hooray, right? Yet when this goes to extreme, which is all too common, it becomes bigotry. Not only are we good, but you are bad. Would we be better off, just armchair speculation here, had evolution programmed us to regard everybody, regardless of physical differences like race or gender, or cultural differences like family, nation, religion, language, as the same? Shouldn't we all just think of everyone as the same? Well, it seems to me probably not. Social beings that we are, again, we need that sense of belonging and mutual responsibility that starts with identification with family and then with other small groups. Evolution favors what promotes survival, right? The us-them distinction promotes survival, security as we look out for each other, and social cohesion. Still, the other side of in-group bonding can be mistrust and even hatred. So we need to consciously socialize ourselves and our children, once again, to be more open to those who are different. We are initially most comfortably with those who are like us, but we really can, in time, learn to be more open to differences. So where might we find a healthier model than us-them, right? Family being the ultimate example of in-group belonging and loyalty, biblical tradition turned to family as the perfect metaphor for the harmony humanity needs to move towards in order to achieve mutual toleration and peace. Though plainly, painfully aware of the multiplicity of peoples and nations, biblical tradition presents humankind as one family. At the beginning of Genesis, God creates one human being and then one couple from whom everyone else is to descend. Ergo, one family. We could all look at any of a series of brother stories in Genesis, and very significantly, in these early tales of Genesis, the brothers are identified as progenitors of different peoples, groups, nations, we would say today, around what was for our ancestors the whole world. That is, Isaac and Ishmael are both sons of Abraham, even if they don't like one another much. Jacob and Esau are both sons of Isaac. They come to be known as fathers of different peoples, but there was never any doubt in antiquity or today that they were and are kin. When Jacob, you will recall, having to run for his life after defrauding Esau of his birthright, returns home years later, he worries that Esau is still going to want to kill him. And when he sees his brother approaching with 400 men, armed men, he fears a slaughter. He splits his camp in two so that at least half of them can escape if the other half are being attacked. But Esau and Jacob have both matured. They embrace. Jacob offers his brother gifts, and Esau says, oh no, he doesn't need anything. God has already blessed him abundantly. And then I quote, but Jacob said, no, I pray you, if you would do me this favor, accept this gift. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God. That's back to being created in God's image. And it's also back to being one family, whether we like one another or not. As family, despite our quarrels and rivalries, we can represent God to each other. But first, we have to just get along. This doesn't apply only to Hebrews and their immediate brothers in the Genesis stories either. Earlier in Genesis, the daughters of Abraham's brother Lot, mistakenly thinking that they and their old father are the last people left alive in the world when Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed, these daughters have sexual relations with Lot while he is too drunk to know what's going on. They believe they are acting to save humankind from extinction, which to my modern ears sounds noble. But the biblical author's horror of incest is being put to a very different use in this sexist story. The women become pregnant with sons named Ammon and Moab, which is to say they are progenitors of two of Israel's traditional enemies. The question to the biblical author here is how Ammonites and Moabites can be such miserable people. Well, they're children of incest. Yet here, even though there isn't reconciliation in the tale, the secondary lesson remains plain. Even enemies are direct kin. The chapters of begats in Genesis 10 and 11, which we all skip over in Bible studies today, they're boring, right? But in their time, the people hearing those stories knew these names and knew these peoples that were all around them, and this is explaining how the original peoples became, so varied and different and occupying different spots, but all, we would say in Yiddish, mishpacha, all family. The idea of one human family is not mere wishful thinking or hyperbole. As a matter of fact, science, as well as religion, sees Homo sapiens as having evolved from common ancestors. And when we find common elements of human nature arising naturally from our evolved bodies, and especially our brains, that further demonstrates that we are, in many ways, related to one another. Yearning for world peace, some have worked to minimize differences among various branches of the family. And some of them are mostly idealistic, but almost comical. We don't speak the same language, so let's all learn Esperanto. It was a bold experiment, even if it didn't quite work. Or in the religious world, it's not just that some of us want to convert others of us. There are groups like the Baha'is who say, hey, we can all just, a lot of Unitarian Universalists, right? We can all just worship together and share what we have. We don't have to be alike. We need only learn to respect our differences. Family members are related, but they aren't identical. Not in my family, and I bet not in yours. We can each develop, take on new interests, even move to other nations or convert to other religions. But we never lose our own background, who we are. That lies at the heart of our development from the start. Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel encountered a young Jew who reported wanting to leave his partisan, particular Jewish identity behind and instead just love all of humankind. And Wiesel responded pungently, "The Jew influences his environment, though he resists assimilation. Others will benefit from his experience to the degree that it is and remains unique. Only by accepting his Jewishness can he attain universality. The Jew who repudiates himself, claiming to do so for the sake of humanity, will inevitably repudiate humanity in the end. A lie cannot be a stepping stone to truth. It can only be an obstacle." And you could change Jew to Italian or Buddhist or whatever you wanted, and the passage would ring true in the same way. Furthermore, our various particular identities have deep emotional resonance to each of us. We would really be losing something if we dropped our particularity for some mythical universality. And I don't use myth as a put down. It's an ideal, but there needs to be a balance between universalism and particularism. So, just to use myself as an example, I am at the same time male and Jewish and American and a clergy person and a folk music and classical music lover and so on and so forth. It's all right if I get choked up one day singing a patriotic American song and another day gazing out from the Mount of Olives over Jerusalem. These and many other aspects of what I feel as valid as my story are important emotional parts of my uniqueness, as well as each of our, my, yours, universality. Or as Walt Whitman famously put it, I am large, I contain multitudes. Maybe world peace is just a goal, an ideal. We cannot, it seems to me, escape entirely our own nature, which needs in us and thus inescapably creates a them. But we can, at the very least, do a whole lot better than we are doing in our day. We have to get to know each other, first in the intimacy of family and community, and then by some relatively minor risk-taking, get to know others, cultivate relationships with individuals and groups we might otherwise never get to know. It takes an effort, but it's doable, and we can teach our children to do it as well. Amen.